I'm here to talk about neoliberalizing value and design, and I'm glad that design comes last because, just like Cameron, I'm a bit of imposter, probably even more so. I'm new to design, I'm new to social design, but very eager to learn for the reasons I'll hopefully explain to you. It's quite crucial to me that I'm talking about the triad, the three terms, because the connection between neoliberalism and design has been exploited before. Guy Julier, who is giving the keynote, wrote a book, a very good book on it. I know that other people in the room had conversations about design school imaginaries in neoliberal times back in 2017. So I'm not going to be doing that today. My talk today explores the interface between neoliberalism and design by asking what neoliberalism or neoliberalizing means first and foremost for value, and only then for design. And in fact, I'll also ask what design can bring into value or valuing. Okay, let's move to my first term. Neoliberalizing. Let me first dispel the kind of popular gossip that neoliberalism is over. We keep on talking about zombie capitalism, post-liberalism, that indeed neoliberalism entered its Brezhnev era of ossification, self-dealing and directionless political churn, as if it wasn't that from the very beginning. But no, neoliberalism is not over because it's, in fact, it's not a political doctrine, it's not an ideology, it's not a period. If by a doctrine you mean something that is end-oriented and has a vision, is underpinned by a vision, neoliberalism is not that, it's rather a modus operandi, it's a way of operating. And this gives it its chameleon-like ability to latch onto any period and, in fact, almost all political systems. Nor is neoliberalism or neoliberalizing, for the reasons that are becoming apparent, limited to economics. It's in fact a colonializing process, not about the use of markets or competition to solve narrowly economic problems, but about extending them to address fundamental problems of modernity. And here my claim is that it's about competition. Neoliberalizing treats competitions as a humanity's defining characteristic and as society's organizing principle. Now, if we ask about what competition is in respect to value, we'll find out what it is that the design can do in this space. So competition is about sorting into winners and losers. In order to achieve this, variables have to be compared, benchmarked, and ranked. What we are asking for is commensurability. Lots of you will be familiar. Commensurability is this idea of reducing different entities to a common metric. There has to be a common denominator between them. So typically that is expressing itself in thumbs up, thumbs down. I think we all know those registers from social media. We are all perpetrators and victims of the system. So because of competition and commensurability, value, our perception of value changes quite significantly because of individualizing of competition. Obviously, there are separate entities to compare, and because competition does really not care about the depth underpinning ranking. Values are on the one hand reduced to a hyper-subjective. They are just personal preferences, right? Nothing more to them. But on the other hand, the demand for auditing and technocratic governance means that we start to think of them as quasi-objective. I mean, you know, if I tell you that GDP is down by 1.4, you're going to think that the world has changed in a significant way, right? not so. The third feature of competition on value is that it obfuscates the valuation practice. There's that kind of black box where subjective preference is transformed into an objective fact out there. You know, someone has that many followers on Facebook. Obviously, that means something, and yet we don't know. We don't understand the mechanisms whereby valuation happens. So now design comes in. And my substantive claim is that design can help us open up the black box whereby values are turned into facts and expose that valuing is first and foremost a meaning-making endeavor. That people talk, deliberate, and contest before they agree on how to measure. And here, of course, you will ask, but how does it happen? Hasn't design sold out? It, after all, shapes the stuff, but also tells us about it under neoliberalism. Of course, it does that, and yet my contention is that if we look at design through the lens and prism of value, we will discover the, what do I want to say, emancipatory? Well, we'll discover how design can go against the grain of neoliberalizing, and more specifically, I think it can go alongside three trajectories. I'm quite interested in looking at a design as a site where valuation is enacted, and here probably I don't need to say much more because Adam has covered it. Becky has spoken about this. Here, though, I do not think that we're talking about democratic spaces, right? There are significant power dynamics. Even people like Mancini, who think that everyone can be a designer, are probably not fully on board with institutional pressures and hegemony, the fact that how people act eternalizes oppression, and that's expressed through their actions. So yes, we need to put institutional lens on design, and yet it's an interesting site to open up how valuing happens. This brings me to the second point. I am interested in design as a method for showing that values are stitched up. Speaking of institutionalizing and framing, valuing does not happen in the head. In order to value, we have to talk about political context, devices, technologies, as well as agents and how they all interact. That Cameron spoke about what it means for not just humans to have agency. So when we're talking about valuing, we talk about those kind of complexes. Here I'm attracted to spatio-temporal assemblages in this context. I'll say no more, ask me up about this. But yeah, I think design can help us to show how valuing is stitched up from those different components. And lastly, and maybe most tentatively, I'm attracted to design as a process. So something with a duration and direction that tends to be goal-oriented. I don't know whether it always is. You can tell me about that. But this idea that there's a duration and direction resonates quite closely with a pragmatic account of value that I'm looking at. What it means is that people value something because they desire to do something with that thing. There's this mean to an end character of valuing. And the question is how the relationship between design as a process and valuing of the process can be exploited. I think that the notion of social material assemblies comes helpful here. That's an idea introduced by designers. And what they mean by it is in fact a form of governing assembly that apparently existed in Nordic or Germanic societies. The role design plays in that is through infrastructuring, something that Ada once again referred to. So design puts in place certain systems that allow people to relate in different ways. And now my claim is that if design is about this skeleton, I think valuing is about muscle tissue around that. In any case, observing how the two are related will open up the black box of valuing process. So to conclude, Well, actually, I'm within 10 minutes. Pretty good. To conclude, as a site, method, and a process, I want to say that design can help us to erode the supremacy of competition and open up the black box of valuation. And if we look at design through the prism of valuing, we may not be anxious about asking the questions, but is design, social design, political, utopian, transformative, and necessary? I think that if we look through valuations lens, we can say with confidence, yes, actually, it is all of those things. Okay? Thanks.